Plan is that I will talk about various elements of this, how to fix broken data governance, and then we'll open it periodically. The plan is to speak for about 45, maybe 50 minutes, and then keep some time for chat and discussion and questions at the end. I'm conscious that this session comes from a half-day workshop that I run, which obviously gives me more room to chat. So Tim will keep me on my toes, and I hope that I don't just take the whole time talking and not letting you guys participate. So that's how we will run it. Okay, got some other people. Gary on the internet, on the blockchain, I suppose. But now Marlow, Mike in Worcestershire, Marion in Belfast, Nicola in Kent. So great coverage. Right, let's get going then. Let's just close that window and open that window. Right, so a little bit of background about me, why I'm possibly worth listening to about the subject. I started as a grad at Deloitte for 9 years, 2002 to 11. Did what I would now recognise as being a master data analyst role. I worked a lot with the compliance systems, but it wasn't the systems, it was the data behind the systems and making the data. So that's how I started. Then I was offered a role in the Beazley, which is a Lloyd's of London insurer, about data quality. Thought it was much the same job. Discovered rapidly that A, it wasn't, but B, I could pick up the role quickly. And so did that for about 6 years. That was about Solvency II. That was my introduction to all the data governance. The idea was that they'd had kind of a project and consultants in to set them up. They needed to actually make it real, make it tangible and deliver. And so that's what I did there. And then the rest of my time was really rolling out and expanding. Went solo almost exactly 4 years ago, generally insurance clients, but I've also worked in retail with engineering, and really like working in organizations who have realized that they need to get a better hand on their data, but haven't got down the journey yet. And so it's getting them started and understanding what to do. And then, so what is Datazed? So it's a consultancy that's focused just on data governance quality. So I don't try and do other things outside that zone. It's very much, this is our world. But I do offer what I call Datazed Associates. So I've got a whole panel group of friends and colleagues who can offer, for example, let's say you want an enterprise architecture. That's not my area, but I can work with somebody who adds that piece on. So that builds out the team that way. Only deliver on data projects, only use experienced people, and very proud to be independent. So first of all, I'll talk about cars. I like talking about cars if we're not talking about football. This is the Volvo P1800 Cyan Edition. Racing people that do Volvo's racing cars and they do their sports cars. And this particular car will be about $500,000 basic to have made. And when you got to the waiting list, it will take them 12 to 18 months based on how you configure it and what they do. It's all very handmade. But they don't make the car from scratch. What they actually do is they ask you and say, you need to supply us one of these, which is the original Volvo P1800 from the 60s. And it's for, I think, tax or regulatory or whatever reasons. They want you to have the original old car, and then they replace every single part of it, but it's still registered as the original car, so it doesn't need to go through various procedures as if you built a brand new one. So that was that's why it was the illustration for the event. And that's what I'm talking about. So we're not saying let's build from scratch here. We're saying we've got a car which sort of goes. And yeah, it's got wheels and tires and windows and body, but actually it doesn't work. It's on a trailer. And so we're going now to sort of make it into something a bit more like the blue car. So my expectation is if you've got a red car in your workplace, then let's try and make it a bit more blue. In other words, so a lot of organizations have done data governance, done data quality by now, maybe regulatory, and maybe other reasons had a go, generally failed. No, not unusual that it's failed first time round. But what's a real challenge is when it's failed first time, how do you then get it to work second time? Because it's already damaged goods. There'll be senior execs and leaders who aren't going to trust you because they'll know it's gone wrong before. And so what are we going to do to actually regain that trust and rebuild it and make it work second time round or third time round or however many times it's been when you get there? And the first thing I think we need to do, and it's very much practitioner focused session is to look at ourselves and say, well, how did we end up in this position? If you're a consultant like me, then that's fairly obvious, but most people won't be doing it in that role. So maybe they brought you in because you've been in a different role in a business and you've succeeded, and they know you're a good person, you're a strong person, and that you can do this. So they said, will you go and take on sorting out our data? They might say, we delivered on this other project in an entirely different area really well, so why don't you go and do that? Or they might have said, it's a challenge for you. So maybe you come in as an analyst, as an MI person, and they've gone, well, we want to see if you can take the next step and take a leadership role on. So we'll give you this project and we'll support you through it, but we need to see if you can take that next step and be a leader. Could be like me, they want the external person in who doesn't have the baggage and emotional attachment and can tell people how it really is. You might be the person that's been in the business for years and years and years and just knows every skeleton, every nook and cranny and can just fix it all. Or it might just be that you're a technical superstar and you're the only one that knows how the data warehouse operates or how the systems fit together or what systems exist. And so they want you to bring in that knowledge. So point I'm making is there's loads of reasons why you might have been given the challenge of sorting out data governance, data quality. And you might think, how me, why me? But actually there's many good reasons why it's you. So we've got to get rid of that imposter syndrome. We've got to know that it's all about us and we can do this. And the first thing that we're going to do is we have to work out what the situation is, whether you come in from another company or another team or you're entirely external. And there are some standard techniques that we can use. And the one you probably want to use, I've put last because I don't want you to use that. But we're going to run through a few different techniques and just look at the pros and cons of them. These slides, by the way, and the whole session will make available afterwards, so you don't need to try and copy all this down unless you really want to. First idea we've got is that we can interview people. So we can have a nice chat, one-on-one over a coffee, maybe even face-to-face if things continue to improve. You can have that, building that rapport and that relationship and really find out what people are thinking. However, you can very quickly fill a diary with 10 or 15-hour sessions. So you've got that problem of taking up time. And if the relationship doesn't gel, then it might be argument. It could lead to confrontation or argument and go backwards. Facilitated workshops. So they can work very well. You have a group ownership. You get to a consensus of what's going on. Often as people share knowledge of their own piece of the jigsaw, then other people add to it. And so you can find out the combined how everything works. It's expensive. You know, if you pull 10, 20, 30 people out of their day jobs, that's a lot of resource that you've taken away from making money. And you need a really good facilitator who can make this work. Otherwise, it can become either a chance for you just to vent and moan, or maybe it's for people who just kind of don't want to talk and let one or two people dominate. So having a good facilitator is really important. And also, before you even get through the door, how do you get the right people in the room? How do you make sure that you invite them? And then those important characters send the deputy, send the delegate, or promise to come, and then find a more interesting thing to do instead and don't come. If they're not in the room, you've lost them for that whole event. Observation. So what we're talking about here is you look at what they do from the outside. So you say to these people, do your job, do your role, just let me kind of sit over your shoulder, see how you fill the system in, how you complete this process, maybe ask some questions. And that helps you see what people do in real life to an extent. There's a danger that they will adapt their behavior because the person's watching them. So the shortcuts they normally take, unless you can be really persuasive and tell them to be open, those shortcuts may well be hidden as they do it by the book, and so you're not finding out what they really get up to. But it is a good way, especially as an outsider, to immerse yourself in the world of the people actually handling the data. Moving on, and I guess to a natural data person, these might be the more appealing but possibly less effective approaches. So document analysis, so send me all your processes, send me your documents, send me your mappings, let me dig through it. Especially, I guess, you're working from home, you can just have a quiet place and spend happy days reading other people's material. So you'll get the text out, but it takes a lot of time. And how realistic is it? Was this a process designed 5 years ago? And over time, things have changed, things have not been used, things have been added that you don't know. And then the final one, which I think would have been the default, is a questionnaire or a survey. And yet, fire up SurveyMonkey, fire up DropPad, do questions, let people get back to you. If you've ever bought anything in a shop, online, offline, you probably had a survey. If you've ever ignored it completely or put a load of nonsense down in response, then you know just how limited the ability to get good quality answers are. So maybe it will work, and it's certainly a very easy thing to organise. But I generally avoid doing so unless let's say you've got a very disparate group. They're all over the place, all over the world, all over different areas, and it's the only way to get their answers in. But really, I think that should be the sort of the last resort approach. So that's us running through a series of ways that you can talk to people and find out what's going on in the environment. So we've worked on ourselves, and we've worked on how to talk to people. Now we need to look at the participants, the stakeholders, the players in the game. And what we've got to do is we've got to avoid the blame game, because frankly, we don't care. We're not interested in the failures of the past, we're interested in into the future. And so we don't want to find out who's got a beef with whom, we want to find out what the problems are. And these are techniques that you will employ when you're doing those workshops, or those interviews, or those discussions. And the first one is this idea of active listening. Maybe some of you are actively listening now. Maybe some of you are checking your email on the other side, in which case I'm with you. I probably do the same, but please don't. And by being in the room and actually listening, rather than thinking, what could my next question be, we learn a lot more in a lot less time. Non-judgmental. So again, as an outsider, it's easier because you don't have to justify the existence of these people. You don't have to be concerned about how they got to where they are. There'll be some people who are fearful that maybe their role will change or disappear in a way they don't like. If their job is to manually fix data, and then you're coming in going, well, let's stop the data problems from needing fixing, that can be seen as a threat. So being able to deal with that and not judging how they're going to behave is key. Verbal skills. So if your questions take longer than their answers, that's something's going wrong. We want open questions, we want short questions. We let the person talk. Oprah Winfrey, obviously, topic of the hour, is very respected in her role because of her skill at saying a few words and then letting the other person talk and talk and talk and give away the valuable information. Whereas if you were asking more leading questions that were short and lead to a yes/no answer, you get nowhere. So this idea of be more Oprah. Body language. And body language is not just in the room, even on Zoom or Teams, we can still see people are leaning in, leaning out, how they look. We need to have caution. I was in one meeting where a colleague was very folded arms and looking down and not happy at all. And in that case, our mutual manager did pick up on it and said, is everything okay? And he said, well, I left my jacket downstairs on my desk and this meeting room is really cold and I'm freezing. So actually the language of closing up and looking down, which traditionally would be, oh, they're not happy, just meant put the heating up, please. There are cultural differences, especially as we try and now do things remotely from different places, whether people talk more or less, whether they go quiet, how they behave. So again, we need to be careful that we aren't putting our own impressions of how one ought to behave or does behave onto people that behave in a very different way. So that's a blast through of analysing ourselves, analysing the situation, analysing participants. We haven't actually solved any problems yet, but I think it's important that we analyse where we are and how it all functions. So why don't we kind of just pause for a few minutes, if there's any questions in the chat, or people just want to wave, maybe if you kind of use the wave or the chat and say, if you want us to open up the mic for you. Okay, I can see Marissa. Tia, can you let Marissa speak? She's got a thumb up.
Ooh. Hello.
Hello, Marissa.
Yeah, I opened my thumb up because I couldn't find the hand. Back to your first bit about eliciting information. You listed a few. So what would you recommend? I didn't see. A combination of all of them?
So that's a really good question. Thank you. It's about having a playbook of different approaches that depend on the situation. So I was in one literally yesterday where it was 5 or 6 people on a mutual Zoom chat, and we were able to work our way through a document and understand the process, and people were able to interject. But if that had been a group of 15, I think it would have fallen over because it would have been too much speaking over each other or not being able to speak at all. A workshop can work well, but I've seen that done where someone had, it was a 1,000-person company and there were 50 people on the call or in the room. So it's 5% of the entire organization globally. We're trying to achieve one definition. So knowing what the numbers are, where they're based, what you're trying to learn from them, who they are, and then being able to say, this person needs an interview. Maybe if you turn to the CEO, a one-to-one interview is a way to go because of their status. If you want to get out of the team, let's say it's insurance, and you've got the group of underwriting assistants, then maybe a workshop with 15 or 20 of them in one go is better because then they can all kind of work together. So it's about knowing what to use and when.
Yeah, thank you. So like a combination then, and horses for courses.
That's it. Think of it as a toolbox.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? I can see one coming from chat, but it hasn't finished writing yet. Tia, are there any thumbs up at your end?
Not that I can see.
Okay, so let's move on to the next section then. But again, feel free to use a hand up. Oh, hang on, we have got a question. Okay, Tom, I'm going to assume that I can read it out. It's not private, so if it is private, then shout very quickly. He's written, my immediate challenge, I'm an experienced CIO and a custom professional management of data. I'm working on pro bono, so that's a free piece of work for an organization, government, medical world. They need a data strategy because that's something I can buy, or do they have to build their own from scratch? So, that's a challenge. So, is that something you can address right now? I don't think it's something that you can just buy off the shelf. I think data governance, data quality, it needs to adapt to the situation, because the challenges that you've got will be very different depending on the sector, depending on the maturity of the business. So I think what you can do is say, we need to understand how to do the data, what the strategy should be. And by learning about the organization, you can then really find out where the gaps are. So take the example of the elicitation. Having a toolbox, so it's not just a toolbox of elicitation techniques, there's a toolbox of data governance approaches. Do you start with lineage? Do you start with a dictionary? Do you start with mappings and what have you? And seeing how to play that. But yeah, I can see, happy to chat offline. Let's do that, let's chat offline. I will have all the contact details, not only on LinkedIn, I'll put a slide at the end so you can follow up if you don't mind. Great. Oh, thank you, Gary. You can buy a data strategy off the shelf, but it won't be the organization. You're right. If you just want one, I can sell you a folder and I'll do a really pretty label that says data strategy. Happy to do that for you. Not that it'll work, but who knows. Right, let's move on. So how to leverage existing materials and processes, reduce, reuse, recycle. So this is an approach I take a lot. I like recycling. I have my paper and my card and my glass and my metal that all goes into the right blue bin. And I apply that as well in a work context. There's a tendency, I think, to want to rip things up and start all over again, or to say, you know, whoever did this before was useless and we just can't use any of it. And that feels like a tremendous waste and disappointment, and not the approach you should be taking. So we'll go through the 3 sections, which will be reduce, reuse, and recycle. And reduce, so again, if you think about it in the traditional sense, that's saying, well, instead of throwing away lots of food, why not buy less food in the first place? In this context, it's looking at, well, what are the activities? What are you doing that you frankly shouldn't be doing, or you're doing too much of? So there's a great example on a business analysis course, BA course I did a few years back. And they discovered that a team in finance sent a ring-bound report to their colleagues downstairs in whatever department it was every Friday, and the department received it and they put it in the filing cabinet and it was never seen again. And the process analyst who was trying to make things leaner and meaner asked what was going on, and finance just said, we got a request to do this report, we don't really know why, but they asked for certain numbers and certain order, and we send it down every week. And they asked the other people, why did you ask for it? And they went, we didn't, we have no idea why it comes, but it seems important, so we keep it in the cupboard just in case. When they dug down, it turned out that 1 week the dashboard had failed, or the network had failed, whatever. The general way of passing information online hadn't worked. And so they asked for a printed report to get them through this gap so they could at least look at the numbers. But over time, that had become sent every week, and over months, that became every month and every year. And all this work was being done because one person had asked for a short-term fix and they'd never thought to ask to stop. One way you can get around that, one company I know, or at least one company, have a sunset policy. So let's say you've asked for a report, that report will stop being delivered after 3 or 6 or 12 months, unless you consciously come back and say, please carry on doing it. So the idea is things are only ever short term. And if it was long term, then it's a report the right way. Maybe you deliver a different solution or an automated approach. So first of all, just do less stuff. So, actually, sorry, there you go. See, I should have done less stuff. I've got 2 slides to reduce and I could have done 1. Too many controls that, so that's asking too many questions that we don't really care what happens. Controls that don't lead to a benefit, dashboards we don't look at. Massive problem, the last one, everyone wants to produce brilliant dashboards and Tableau and Power BI and the like. But are they being used? Controls that don't lead to a benefit. So I've found often that what you get is a controller set up to say, did you do your job? So the control will be, did you load the file? Did the file have a valid suffix? Did the file have any errors in it? And actually, you don't care about that. What you care about is the data any good? Has the data that's come in met the quality requirements, which is a very similar question in terms of what you're doing, but a very different question in terms of approach. Because you're saying, I don't care what the file suffix is. I want to know if the data came through right. If it came through correctly, then the suffix was fine. It must have been, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. So we look at what we want from the data, and we're not just thinking about the steps of the process. Reuse. So what have we got? What should we keep? So there are lots of things that are probably lying around in the organization. So there's tools and tech. So it might not be your favorite data quality tool or your favorite customer management platform, but if they've got it, especially if it's being paid for and there's a license already in place, we should look at making the most of it before we go shopping elsewhere. Documentation's been written, and yes, it's probably old or out of date or not reviewed, but it's a start point, much easier than that horrible scary moment when you open a brand new document in Word and you just have a big white rectangle and a flashing line and nothing. Much prefer to start with something in place. Training, so GDPR came in, every organization had to train its staff, train its teams, probably did some cool videos or animations, whatever. Can we repurpose that? I've often recommended that you don't want to give people a data governance training session. That feels like overkill. But if they're going to have annual training on GDPR or anti-money laundering, why not sneak in a couple of slides there about data quality or data governance? So they're learning it, but it's not done as a whole separate activity. Legacy documentation. So this can be, for example, older systems that explain how things got to where they are. So older versions of files. Older versions of files that there might be, that just help you understand the background. System development documents. So you build a data warehouse. The designers, so the builders of it will need to know what the fields were and what the criteria were. So for example, it's a text string of a certain number of characters. It has to be a number. This is free text. So at least we've now got a beginning of understanding what the data should be. Maybe not what the business wants the data to be, but at least what the system requires it to be, which gives you a head start because it tells you name, number, character, string type, and so on. And then finally, there's roles and committees. So we'll talk about data committees later on, but it might be there's a steer co or a project co or some other operations activity or team or role or committee where we can append onto the activities around data. And then finally, so we've done reduce and we've done reuse, and now we'll do recycle. What can we repurpose? And here, so the roles and committees come up again. And it's not just the idea of engaging committee and adding to agenda, that's one, that is in the reuse, but also recycle. So I was in a situation where there was a really well-organized and well-run data governance committee, and it met frequently, and the people who attended the committee knew the business, they represented different parts of the business, they understood it, and they really came with interesting and valuable information. But the issues never went away, and they would come back with the issue and it would still be there a month later and a quarter later and 6 months later and however long it was. And the reason was that we had the wrong people on the committee. We had the people who knew the problems, but we didn't have the people that could do anything about it. And they didn't have the authority to sign off spend. They didn't have the clout to change people's roles or repurpose. And so a change was made to effectively get all the bosses of those people on the committee instead. So they were clearly being fed material by their colleagues who knew everything that was going on. But they actually had the ability to say, yes, we'll do this and we'll go away and spend budget or time. In this case, the COO said, you know what, I will now authorize my team, anything under 10K, I'll let them go on and get it done. Anything over that, I want to know about it, but anything under that fixes a problem, I want this. And repurposing that committee to a more senior level was a really important step in delivering more data value to the org. Similarly, you've got a risk team, you've got a compliance team, you've got InfoSec or data privacy, you'll have MI and reporting teams who are all doing data stuff. So for example, access to data. If it's not in the data team, it probably sits with the an IT team or maybe the risk team. So you might go, well, actually, I'm data, I should be taking over that and I should be controlling access. But do you really need to? Maybe the current people doing that process do it perfectly well. And as long as you engage and interact and have a good path backwards and forwards on who does what and when and why, you can reuse that. So you don't need to rip it all up. You can say, I can see who's doing valuable work here, and we'll make the most of that, and we'll combine and we'll grow that way. And there's another session I do where we talk about master data management and data governance, which again, traditionally can be two different teams or two different areas. And in that session, I explain how by working together on those two sessions, you actually get far more value out than component parts. So it's about the recycling and repurposing. So what do we do after we've reduced, reused, and recycled? Because they're all great ideas, but we need to do something. So we've got to create a plan. So going back again, let's step back and look at ourselves. Let's think about how we're going to do this. We need to create a plan of action. And in the workshop version of this, we'd actually start drafting out our plans and then playing with them and maybe debating them. But here we'll have to kind of be a bit quicker. So what's in our plan? What are we doing? So there's loads of ideas I've shared with you, but you've got to decide which bits you do. You're not going to do them all. And if you are going to try and do most or all of them, they'll need to be in order and you won't do them all straight away. So what are you actually going to do? Why? So you might think what I should do is build out or fix or append the data dictionary, and we will understand all the terms are used in the business and we'll define them. And then I say, well, why? Because what you'll have is a beautiful data dictionary and that still doesn't make profit or reduce costs. It's valuable information, but so what? So why? And you could come to me with an answer and explain, well, because I now know the definition of data, we can align reports so that the reports come out and now using the same language. To which you go, why? And then we go, well, actually, because now if sales and marketing have got the same report, they can now make better decisions. And now I've got to a point. So now I understand that sales want to decide how to do something, or marketing want to decide how to do something. At the moment, their decisions are flawed because they don't have the right numbers in front of them. To get to that point, they need better reporting. To get to that point, we need to know what the data means. And so now I'm actually on a much more powerful case. I'm not saying, let's do a data dictionary because I'm a data geek and I love data dictionaries. I'm saying, let's do a data dictionary because it then lets these people do that job so they're more efficient. And again, this is not what I find with a lot of the work I'm doing is it's not rocket science. It's not necessarily things that you think of by yourself or that your colleagues would think of independently, but it's when you have it explained, you go, yes, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. And now I realize this is what we're trying to achieve. I'll get on and do it. So it's that idea of just creating the world where people go, I now understand why you're talking about all this data stuff all the time, why you want to do it. How can we demonstrate that it works? So I would typically go for a minimum viable product. So let's play that previous example. We talked about marketing and sales. Can we just take one report that clashes and look at a couple of terms that are a point of issue and just get those couple of things cleared up? Keep it simple. You know, if your first term that you want to agree on is customer, you're going to fail quickly because that's really, really hard. But if it's, for example, I'll go back to my default of insurance, if it's on gross written premium, which is just a way of describing how money comes in, that's a fairly well understood term. And so that will not have a major argument or fight about it. So we'll start with terms that are not too controversial and go that way. If that works and that delivers value, then we get the encouragement to say, well, actually now do a bit more, a bit bigger, increase your scope. And the requirement for the firm to invest before they see the results, because it's a bigger piece of work, you've now got a better chance of because you've won some credibility. Can we quantify it? So I've said, let's do a data dictionary, and I've explained why we should do it, and we've done a little sample. But can we quantify it? Means how much are we going to do? Are we going to try and define every term in the organization? Are we going to try not only definitions, but also describe constraints and synonyms and quality standards, or are we going to cut it a little bit short? Are we just going to work in one division, try and do 10 terms or 100 terms or 10,000 terms? So we need to be able to really quantify what we're achieving. We can't leave it open-ended. So those are the elements I'd be thinking about when drawing a plan, so that when I'm going to start building my data governance reboot, I'm saying what I'm going to do, what the activities are, why, how it works, and how much of it is going to be. I think that's actually probably a good point to pause. So again, let's see. I've seen lots of things flashing in the chat, but too many words to read. So unless there are any questions in there, or any hands up, Tia? Are there any hands up?
No hands up as of yet, but I think Sonia had a question in the chat.
Sonia, would you be willing just to kind of summarize quickly what we were chatting about?
It was only a small thing, but I've had quite a lot of feedback. So I was just querying how you can monitor the MI, the reports, dashboards, etc. How they are read and used by the people who request them in the first place. And we were just discussing in the chat that you can do some logging of them. So that would be one way of doing it. But a more radical way of doing it is just to stop them and see who cries for them. But I just think sometimes I took on a team once that produced all of that, and I just turned them all off just to see, and it was surprising what demand there wasn't after I'd done that. And it just seems a shame, so much effort So I keep thinking that the best way to go is to have like a central place where people can self-serve and create their own dashboards and MI and things, because then they get what they want and it's low effort, is what I was thinking. It was just a question after one of your points on there.
Yeah, there's a cartoon that I've seen go around LinkedIn and elsewhere, which is a massive wall, almost like a cinema screen full of dashboards, and you can see everything's going green and looking really good. And then there's one chart which is showing red and very bad. So the manager says, it's all looking great, but what's this chart at the bottom? And they say, oh, this is how much people understand the dashboards that are being put out nowadays. That's sunk down to nowhere. But yeah, you're right. The IT side of me does say just pull the plug out and see who screams loudest. Whether you can even be nefarious and blame it on IT, and then just see who wants it back. Let's go more into the dark arts.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort though. There always seems to be so much effort in producing information that doesn't get used. So yeah.
I think that's why the sunset period works, because you can say, well, I'll build it, certainly on new ones, I'll build it for you, we'll give it to you for 6 months or 3 months, and then we'll stop and shout if you need it again. Okay, anything else?
I think just Marissa's got her hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna, oh God, I'm doing this on my phone, so it's a bit weird. But no, in response to Sonia's sort of like let everyone DIY, I think the argument against that was the duplication of effort and absence of one version of the truth, which is obviously where data governance plays a part as well. And I really like your sunset period, Gary. I think that combined with usage monitoring and alerts that something's going to be switched off is a good place to get to, isn't it?
I think I've seen Nicola also has noted about self-serve being dangerous without full data governance. What I find self-serve is that people all think that they're unique and important. And so there'll be a standard report, but they'll go, well, I like that report, but I want one column different or one filter different. And so they'll create a second report, which is basically the first with a twiddly bit. And then suddenly you've got 50 reports that are all the same report. And actually, this goes back to another issue, which is when you have system changes and people think, well, I can't buy this tool off the shelf because it needs to be customized to for our special business. And they both reflect on a point, which is the more we can standardize and use things in default form, then it's much easier when it comes to changing and upgrading. The more bespoke we get, then we'll still get that problem. In fact, we'll go back to our nice blue car at the very beginning. You know, if you break that car and you want to fix it and they're only making 3 a year because they're handmade, you can imagine the difficulty and expense and challenge of doing so. If you buy your nice mass-produced Volvo instead, I think maintenance becomes much less challenging, even if it's a bit less exciting.
Don't knock the Volvo.
I love Volvos. So, and Gary makes the point, yes, if it's an annual report, then it's 6 months. Fair point. I'll take that one. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on then. So now we're on to stakeholder engagement. So if you recall, I mentioned that we're in a situation where the data governance or quality or whatever has not worked before. We're in to try and fix it again. And I always think of one example whereby we weren't allowed to call the data warehouse because a very important executive had been involved in a failed data warehouse at the previous employer. And so whenever that phrase was mentioned, he just recoiled. And so they use some words rather than BI or something called the BI center, just to kind of use euphemism so they wouldn't realize what they were talking about and object. So we've got to understand our stakeholders. Who are they? Who makes the decisions? Because sometimes it can be that a very senior person is reliant on one of their colleagues to really influence and explain to them the detail on what decision they should make. And then we look at seniority and its influence. And this is something I found very valuable, which is, well, let's start at the bottom. Net Promoter Score. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's more used in retail. This is the idea of, you know, you've shopped at John Lewis, would you shop again? Would you recommend us to our friends? And it uses a point system between plus 100 and minus 100 more often than not. And if you think good things, there's a positive score, and people say bad things, a negative score, and they will aim to get to a certain point. So in a service of, let's say, bridge purchase, like maybe, I don't know, some sort of insurance or building work, 5, 10, 15 might be great. If you're in one of those very custom, I don't know, an Amazon or the like, they'll be aiming for 70s and 80s. But what we can do is pinch that idea for ourselves. And we go, how noisy are these people? And how important are they? And how good do they think that we are? So you might have someone very senior, but actually in a little quiet corner of the business who no one really talks to. And they can think you're fabulous and great, but as no one listens to them, you've not got very far. You might have someone that's not very senior, but everybody knows what they think because they share their views so often and so loudly. And working on those people actually is probably more valuable, because if they think you're great, they'll tell the whole world. And so what you can start doing is mapping out your stakeholders and working out who they are, how much of a say they have, and what they think of you. And again, at the start of this activity, you can do well, because you can ask people, how good are we? And feel free to say that it's complete rubbish, because we're starting again anyway. So rather than having to politely say, oh, I'm sure you're a 6 or 7 out of 10. If you're a 1 or a 2 out of 10, then just say it, because at least we know where we are. And then by getting from 2 out of 10 to 5 out of 10 is actually good progress, and we're on the way to our 7s, 8s and 9s. So I think that's a really important way of understanding who people are and where they are. And how can you get access to them? So maybe it's a personal network piece. Maybe you have your project sponsor has people in the right place, or you know them from other roles. If you don't have the personal way of doing it, then you can also think about quick wins. So if you can deliver a quick win for someone important and they get bought in, then that can take you places. And counterintuitively, you might find someone who thinks that you're absolutely useless, or you're not you, because you're new, someone who thinks that the data team is absolutely useless, and then you can do some work with them and help them. Often they will flip from your biggest deriders to your biggest supporters, and that can be incredibly powerful. You haven't just turned kind of a challenge into neutral, but you've actually turned it into an opportunity and a benefit. So actually having the courage, and I know with data people, it's hard, we don't like to do the whole scary people side of it, that's our natural way. But if we can go and take on those who are challenging us the most, we can really get some valuable benefit from it. What do they want to hear? I think there's always 3 messages, and you can code it any way you want, but they'll all come down to one of these 3. Will it make me more money? Will it make me spend less money? Or will it stop someone sending me to prison? They're kind of 3 things, aren't they? Revenue is always good, especially in a growth market. In a more challenging market, there might be more of a, can we batten down the hatch to reduce our costs? And there'll always be this concept of, will it lower our risk? Will it mean that its privacy data is not leaking out and all the embarrassment that causes? Is it a regulatory manner? If your regulatory body is asking for reports and you're sending the reports that have errors, that's a real issue. So whatever you've managed to achieve or want to achieve is going to come into one of those 3 categories. And does your data governance activity support them? So we've said we want to achieve these things, but is it your activity supporting it? And there can be a bit of a challenge here with who gets the credit for the work. And again, this comes into the more political stance, understanding the people and the stakeholders. So it might be, for example, take insurance claims. Because we improve the data, less money is paid out in claims because we can challenge better. So you might say, I've saved the organisation £50 million because they have better claims data. And a claims team will go, we saved the company £50 million because we paid out less money in claims and we didn't upset anybody. And you're both telling the truth, but who's going to take the credit for it? Who's going to actually get the funding as a result? And this is about viewing data governance as part of the business. It can't just be the data team did X and the claims team did Y. You did it together. You enable them to do activity. And if you've done it in a good way, then they actually will be your advocates, because they'll say, we think data governance needs more support because they saved us 50 million this year and we want to save 100 million next year. So you get the buy-in that way. Otherwise, you can just have a very unedifying turf war about where the money goes or comes from. Right, final points at quarter two. Did you capture all the considerations? So this is going back to the analysis at the start. Did we really learn all we needed to learn about the organisation? And compare and discuss with colleagues. So maybe you think that you know what you've understood, but then go back to your colleagues and talk to them. Here's how I think it all looks. What do you think? And you might get that gem of, oh, but didn't you remember about this department that caused a problem, or that system that failed? What are the barriers? Is it there's no budget? Is it that the person that was involved in this has left and so you haven't got that support anymore? Is it there's a massive piece of M&A going on and so the organisation is too busy dealing with that to deal with what you want to do? So what's stopping you? And importantly, what are you going to do when you go back to work? So we've done this session and we can stick another hour on our CPD logs, but are you actually going to actively do something? And if you're going to do it, you're going to have to do it very soon, because every day that goes from this session to you starting is a day that you probably won't do it at all. So if you're keen on getting to this, you really need to start jotting down some notes, and at least getting that work begun and thinking what are you trying to achieve and how. And when are you going to do it? So I've said, start thinking now, start making your notes now. But is this an activity for this quarter? Next quarter, maybe there's a budget review, so you've got to wait till then. But get that date in your diary. Say, we're going to look at this work from now with this person. Here's the backing. Here's what I need. Here's what I need to get there. If the budget session, the budget planning session, let's say, is in August, then you're going to want to start talking to people no later than May or June to start winning advocates for your work, so that you've got a good chance of getting through that budget session. It's about planning. And what does success look like? So success doesn't look like a data dictionary that's been completed. It's going to look like money coming in, costs not going out, or risk reduced. And you need to know that end goal. Amazon, very famously, they get people to start new initiatives and ideas by writing the press release, which is the document that says, we did X and we delivered these benefits. So it actually describes the end. And then you go, right, now we think that was a good place that we want to get to. How do we get there? And we go back and plan how to operate it. So understanding what success looks like will really help you. Right, so let's just recap before we close. We understood our role. We understood why we're there, what we can offer, and why we're so good. We were fighting off that imposter syndrome we all get. We worked out how to find the problems. So we built a toolbox of elicitation techniques, when to talk, when to write things, when to meet with them, when to network, and to how to find out what you need to know. We considered how to interact with stakeholders. So we looked at the body language, what they say, what they don't say, making sure we don't talk too much, letting them do the talking, being more Oprah. We decided what we can reduce, reuse, and recycle. So we looked at what there is. We're not just going to start blank. We're going to make the most of what exists and make and derive value from it. We made a plan. So we didn't just have some good ideas in our head, but we actually committed and we made it real, and we said what we're going to do. And then we thought about delivery. So it wasn't just a dream and an aspiration, but we actually thought how we're going to do this in real life. So there's our session. So to follow up, love to keep in touch. On LinkedIn, I know that gives you, or gives me your email address, but generally it says that's only for the use of this session. So I can send you reminders and I can send you the follow-up, but then I can't do anything else. So let me know if I can keep in touch, or if you just want to go to my website, a pop-up on some machines will pop up and you stick your email address in there. Or if you've prevented that with your ad blocker, then just go onto the contact page and get me there. But it'd be great to keep in touch with all you people. And let me know if you want to do this again in the future. I was thinking about a monthly session. Maybe we'll go more interactive, bring people in to talk with me, or we can do things that are more, we can start having Zoom rooms and letting people discuss and come back with their thoughts. So loads of ideas we can do. Really keen that it's driven by the audience and not just by what I want to inflict on people. And then will be a recording, so you can share that. And finally, so if you found it useful, then do tell your friends, they can share it. But if you found this not useful and a bit of a waste of time, then why not tell the colleagues that annoy you? I feel this would be a win-win, because if they annoy you and you don't like the session, then you can take up an hour of their time as well. But I still get some more audience. So I think whether you found it useful or less than useful, I think spreading the word would be great. So we've got about just under 10 minutes left. Q&A. So often I learn more from people that I've trained with. So I learn from my teachers, I learn from my colleagues, but also from my students, people that kind of listen and then push back with much better ideas than I ever had. So let's open it up, and if anyone has any thoughts or questions, let's do that. Tia, do we have anyone? Who's going to be brave? I'll also just scan the chat and see if I need to pick up from there.
I don't have any questions, Charles, but I just want to say thank you for today. I'm not a data person per se, but I've learned things today, and it's just been good to network with these guys. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Charles. It's Duncan Slater here. Obviously, coming from Reltio, we sell fantastic technology, and when we get involved with our customers, they're obviously excited with the technology, and they're excited to get their implementation going and to start seeing value from their investment. But how do we convince them, and how do we communicate the importance and the value of the data governance side of things? Because you can't solve these kind of problems with technology alone. You need to do it in conjunction with people and process. So what kind of tools and techniques would you recommend to help people to not get distracted by technology and rather to focus on solving these issues holistically?
Thanks, Duncan. So I think if you bring in a tool like Reltio, there's two ways that tool got put in, or two ways that interaction with the client. One is that someone who's got the budget has come along and said, we need to improve our data, here's an awesome system, let's go buy it. Or there's the person that goes, we need this system, but they fail to build a business case because they can't really explain why they need to spend so much on doing it this way. And obviously the second one, a problem for you because it doesn't get bought. But I think even the first one's a problem, because if people buy it and can't make the most of it, then they just won't renew their license and go, that was a waste of money, and we'll give up. So I think having the maturity to understand the data and the organization is key. So we'll be looking at concepts like who owns the data, what data have we got, where is it? And even doing it without your tools and systems, doing it relatively manually at the start to get the concepts addressed. And then you can go, we're doing this, but it's lots of work, lots of spreadsheets, and lots of manual data governance activity. Now we can bring in tools that will let us do it faster, better, quicker, quite often cheaper, because you reduce a lot of person time with doing it in an automated way. So I think it's taking on that maturity journey. You take a master data management solution and you say, well, I can bring in data from all your systems, but if I don't know how many systems I've got, where they are, and what's in them, then I can't even begin. So understanding the governance behind it is almost a prelude to then bringing in the hardware, heavy artillery.
Yeah, thanks. That's an important distinction, and it helps to stop people getting distracted by shiny toys and focus on the real business problems that they're looking to solve.
Thank you. I see Linda put one in the chat. She's saying we've got business management standards on data, and we've got data maturity assessment, which we didn't cover at all. Standards compliance, IT controls, what's superseding doc? So I think this goes back to what I mentioned about the reduce side of things and the controls, which is, if you think about it, no one really cares if the controls are done, or maybe compliance are, but no one likes compliance anyway. I was in compliance for a few years, so I can say that. We want to know what you're using the data for, how good is it? Sorry, and is it good enough for what you want to do with it? So it goes back to, what are the key decisions? Is it spend? Is it investment? What data do you need, and where's it coming from? And then we have to work out how to get that data good enough for that purpose. And that will then drive out what the control should be. So maturity assessment, for example, is very good at telling you how bad you are. But if you already know you're lousy, then so what? It feels like a nice activity, but it's not going to add immediate value. That's going to work better when you think you're good and you're not. And so I think move away from the documents for now, Linda. I'd say let's look at where is the actual aim of the game. What are you trying to do? Is it the revenue? Is it the costs? Is it the risk? And then work backwards. Okay, I will see if you can save the chat for me, and then I'll have a look if there's any other questions. I can contact people offline afterwards. But otherwise, I will just put my contact details up there. I guess you probably found me on LinkedIn already through this event. That's my number, that's my website. I go, be more open is my favorite quote. I know this one I didn't even write in advance. That came to me spur of the moment, as the best things are. So really privileged to speak with you. Hope we can do this again. I say maybe on a monthly basis. And thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Charles.